Welcome to MEERTALK. My name is Kathy, your host for today. We are really glad to be getting together for another MEERTALK. Today, we'll be hearing from Professor Xuhui Lee. Then we'll take questions from people in the MEER community. And after that, we'll open it up for some questions from all of you in our audience. In case you didn't see our recent newsletter, Dr. Tao recently attended the Degrees Global Forum on Solar Radiation Management held in Cape Town, South Africa. This event brought together a diverse assembly of scientists, policymakers, and civil society leaders from across the globe with a strong emphasis on elevating voices from the Global South. Dr. Tao was delighted to share MEER's approach, which offers numerous co-benefits, cooling urban areas to combat the heat island effect, thus protecting people from extreme heat, reducing water loss for vital resource conservation, and safeguarding crops from deadly heat waves. In order to carry out all these projects, crucial for MEER's further development, we do rely on donations. If you don't already donate and you'd like to contribute toward our efforts to cool the planet, we appreciate your donations. You can go to meer.org/donate, and we thank you very much. You can also write to info@meer.org to be in touch. Now let me tell you about our guest speaker. Professor Xuhui Lee is Sara Shallenberger Brown Professor of Climate Science at Yale University. His teaching and research concern the interactions between the terrestrial biosphere, the atmosphere, and anthropogenic drivers. If anyone has questions that come up while Professor Lee is presenting, please send them to co-host Rue in the chat. Okay, Professor Lee, we're eager to hear what you have to say, so please take it away.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Yi, for the opportunity here. So the title of my talk is Humid Heat in Cityscapes. When we replace natural landscape with buildings, roads, and other artificial structures, we create a unique microclimate, this urban microclimate. And typically, when we study urban microclimate, we look at it as a difference between in a variable between the city, between the city and the surrounding rural background. So I'm listing here three variables that we commonly study. The difference in air temperature is delta TA, that's really the urban heat island. And then we also look at humidity, difference in vapor pressure between urban and non-urban land. That sometimes is referred to as urban dry island. And we divide this quantity by psychrometric constant, by the psychrometric constant, so that this quantity has the same dimension as air temperature. And then, of course, we look at the combined effects of air temperature and air humidity. So the combined effects is the humid heat. We measure humid heat with this quantity called wet bulb temperature. So you can also look at wet bulb island, difference in wet bulb temperature between urban land, in urban land, and that outside of the urban land. It turns out, if you, by the way, this is a schematic diagram of how you measure wet bulb temperature. If you analyze the sort of the energy balance of the wet bulb thermometer, it turns out then you can actually separate the wet bulb island, the humid heat effect, into two additive components. Air temperature, which is urban heat island, and then humidity, which is urban dry island. You put them together, and the weighting factor is equal. The two weighting factors are equal, about 0.3. So I will return to this and just a moment later. So this is a map showing, based on our study, showing you sort of the intensity of urban heat island, its variation across global cities. This daytime situation in the summer, and it does the intensity does vary from location to location, from one sort of heat climate zone to another climate zone. But overall, if you average across all the cities, you get an intensity of about 0.5 degrees Celsius. Now, if you look at nighttime, the nighttime intensity is generally stronger, much stronger than the daytime urban heat island intensity. Average across all the cities, we are talking about maybe 1.5 degrees Celsius in terms of intensity. So putting together both daytime and nighttime, so the value, the global mean value of urban heat island intensity is slightly less than 0.1 degree, 1 degree Celsius, or we typically say 0.9 degrees Celsius. So people often ask, my students and other people who are not familiar with this topic often ask why do we care? It's just less than a degree of temperature difference. Why do we care so much about this minor increment in temperature? Well, it has to do with the fact that the tail end of a distribution, the extreme events are very, very sensitive to this change, even slight change in the mean value. So that's a statistical property that's well known in climate change research. Let's suppose that this is the uh, probability or occurrence of temperature in a rural background. And then this is the heat wave thresholds. This is the temperature thresholds. We call it heat wave. If temperature exceeds that threshold, is a heat wave. Now, in the urban landscape, that you just need the probability distribution will shift to the right by, on average, 0.9 degrees. In this is the heat wave frequency for rural residents, people living outside of cities, is just this area enclosed by this curve, right? So this is a small number, a frequency of heat wave. And then if you then for urban residents, this frequency is much larger, much greater. So that's the sensitivity of extremes to change in mean, right? Statistically. And of course, people living in the cities, they also experience record temperatures not being seen by rural population, and that's also another factor to keep in mind. So that's really essentially the motivation why we study, even though the increment is not large, but it has very some important consequence in terms of heat stress on urban residents. Now, when we talk about urban heat island and urban dry island, those we tend to refer to sort of mean quantities. Those are mean quantities, citywide mean quantities. Um, but indeed, in actuality, in reality, you also see what we call intra-city, neighborhood to neighborhood variation in the heat stress, right? In temperature and humidity. So let's suppose that you have a sensor and you put this sensor on a bicycle and you bike across the transect. Before you enter the city, your temperature sensor will register stable but relatively low reading. As soon as the bike enters the city, the temperature reading will climb, like as if you were climbing a cliff, and then it will plateau out. Once you reach the downtown core, your sensor may register the highest reading. But of course, when you traverse a city park, a green space in the city, your temperature reading will go down. Right? So that's the effect of a green space in the city. And so this is sort of the schematic diagram but this is also illustrates the way that how you quantify intercity variation, right? And so this is what we did for city of New Haven. This is where the city where Yale University is, and we measure temperature, humidity, and wet bulb temperature using a smart sensor on top of a car, and then we would drive once a day and once at night follow the preset sort of set of routes in the city. And those routes cover many different neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods are heavily wooded, like this here, East Rock. Others are heavily built up, built up neighborhood. And there's also a large variation in terms of demographic factors, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of income, in terms of education level, right? So there's a lot of diversity there. So this is what I'm showing you is the map of temperature, humidity, and wet bulb temperature. You notice that the intra-city variation at air temperature is decent, 2 degrees in the summer daytime. And then another thing of note to notice is that in the daytime for this city, there seems to be an anti-correlation, meaning that between temperature and humidity, meaning that in neighborhoods of low temperature, you get higher humidity. In neighborhoods of high temperature, you get a lower humidity. And then this is the combination, right? This is the wet bulb temperature variation. At nighttime, the signal variation is larger. We are talking about more like 3 degrees of three in excess of 3 degrees of variation across the cityscape. And you notice also the hotspot has been shifted more towards the center of the city. And another thing to notice is that at nighttime, the two variables, humidity and temperature, are positively correlated. So in neighborhoods of low humidity, low temperature, you also get low humidity. In neighborhoods of high temperature, you get high humidity, right? So that's an interesting observation. Now, this is a comparison showing you the air temperature variation of air temperature measured, with a car, more or less at the height of a pedestrian. Yeah. And then this side is the land surface temperature measured by the Landsat satellite. And over the course of over 1 year, there is strong similarity, obviously, spatially. The two variables tend to highly correlate spatially, but you do notice that the magnitude of the variation in the case of air temperature is about 2 degrees, but in the case of land surface temperature, it's more than 10 degrees. So a factor of maybe 8 to 10 difference there. Typically, when people quantify sort of intra-city variation, looking at sort of exposure disparity among different neighborhoods, they tend to use land surface temperature because that data set is readily available from satellite observation. But we want one caution, a word of caution here is that if you rely on land surface temperature, you tend to exaggerate the heat disparity exposure to heat disparity exposure in your city. Now let me switch gear and talk about wet bulb temperature. People are increasingly using wet bulb temperature to look at heat stress because it combines both the effect of temperature on human health and the effect of humidity on human health. So this is a wet bulb thermometer. It's a standard thermometer, but covered with wet cloth, and the cloth is wet all the time. And you also put a ventilation fan to allow for ventilation, and you shelter the temperature sensor in a radiation shelter. So it essentially in what we call the adiabatic environment. And so the wet bulb temperature, the reading will be the same as air temperature, or what we call dry bulb temperature, if humidity is 100%. But if humidity is less than 100%, then the wet bulb temperature will be lower than air temperature. And the drier the air, the larger the difference between wet bulb temperature and air temperature. This is what we call wet bulb depression. And this first bullet point is a technical definition of wet bulb temperature according to the American Meteorological Society, which I will not read. The second bullet point highlights the fact, if you are interested in the thermodynamics of air, then wet bulb temperature is a good measure of the surface moist static energy. Unlike air temperature air temperature is a measure of kinetic energy of molecular motion, right? So it's not it's also another thermodynamic variable. And then also, wet bulb temperature can be interpreted as the lowest temperature that human skin can be cooled to by sweating. In other words, we are basically using the wet bulb thermometer as a physical analog of a human body without clothing, but fully covered by sweat. So the evaporation of the wet cloth mimics the evaporation of human sweat. So that's the connection between this thermodynamic variable and the human physiological underpinning of the interpretation of wet bulb temperature. So this diagram shows you sort of the temperature distribution within the human body, right? So in hot environment, in hot environment, our blood vessels will be fully dilated, allowing efficient energy dissipation to the environment. We are warm-blooded animals, meaning that we need to maintain our core body temperature constant at about 37 degrees Celsius. By core body, I mean like the brain, the heart, and other important vital organs in the body. And also because we are alive, we produce metabolic heat. And this metabolic heat has to go out of the body to the environment. Otherwise, the core temperature will go up and the consequence would be lethal. So now here's a fact. When air temperature goes beyond your core body temperature in very, very hot conditions, temperature exceeding 37 degrees, then ventilation, fan doesn't work anymore. Fan cannot bring any relief to your body. So we rely solely on sweating. So sweating is the only natural way to maintain low skin temperatures. And then another fact is that you need a small temperature, at least 2-degree temperature differential between the skin and deep body to allow heat to dissipate from your body to the environment, right? So in other words, we need to maintain our skin temperature at 35 degrees Celsius or lower in order for the heat to get out. Otherwise, we will just die. And then if the wet bulb temperature of the environment exceeds 35 degrees, then this difference can no longer be maintained because if wet bulb temperature is 35 degrees, our skin can evaporate, but can only evaporate until it can cool the temperature at 35 degrees. If the wet bulb temperature of the environment is, say, 36 degrees, then our evaporation can only cool the skin down to 36 degrees. So if wet bulb temperature of the environment goes beyond 35, then the only way to survive actually is to stay in artificially cooled environment by air conditioning. If we stay in the outdoor condition under such condition for like a few hours, we will suffer. The body temperature will go up. The consequence will be deadly. And in the past, we have seen in several places wet bulb temperature exceeding that lethal thresholds, not for long, but for several hours in some places. Of course, in the future, with global warming, with humidification, global warming temperature will go up. And also, some of you may be aware, when temperature goes up, humidity will also build up in air. So the two combined will create a situation where in some locations, the wet bulb temperature will exceed 35 degrees in the outdoor environment. To illustrate this point, last year there was a heat wave occurred in northern India, in New Delhi and northern India. Temperature was really high, shown here in this diagram, and also humidity was really high. And birds, like humans, are warm-blooded animals. And during that heat wave event, a lot of birds basically died. They couldn't tolerate the humid heat, and they would die and fall off the trees into the ground. It's kind of scary scene. They don't have, obviously, birds don't have the luxury of hiding inside a house with air conditioning, right? And then about a month later, another heat wave hit Saudi Arabia during the Hajj pilgrimage event. About 1,000 people died during that 10-day period. And so this is an analysis of the weather condition during that heat event. What you see is the sort of two-dimensional diagram of relative humidity and temperature, and the combination of those two. And so the combination creates a wet bulb temperature, right? Those are equal wet bulb temperature lines there. 35 degrees lethal threshold is here. Of course, that lethal threshold was not crossed during that event. But people, that 35 degrees really the lethal limit. Many people would suffer at lower wet bulb temperature. And in fact, according to an epidemiological study, when wet bulb temperature exceeds 27 degrees, roughly 27 degrees, old people with 65 years or older, some would you will see mortality occurring. And younger people can withstand a higher wet bulb temperature about maybe 31 degrees. But so typically 37 degrees, the dangerous thresholds, and you notice that on many occasions during this heat wave event, that dangerous threshold was crossed. And so that's why you saw a lot of we saw a lot of mortality, a lot of mortality. Now, this brings me to this last part of this presentation, which is urban heat adaptation, right? How we mitigate urban heat. There are four strategies. White roof. I believe that this community is very engaged in using white roof reflective materials to help cool both local climate, and collectively they also help reduce radiative forcing globally if you implement over a large scale. And then the green roof, another strategy. Green roof is not very useful, not very effective. I mean, in my view, because you need a lot of water and lots to help to keep to allow the vegetation to evaporate water, and of course, water is in many cities is not is a limited resource. And furthermore, if green roof is on top of a tall building, then you need the energy to pump water up there, right? It comes with energy cost. And the third strategy is to use solar roof. This is actually my office building. Half of the actually the whole roof is covered by solar panels. Solar panels have very low albedo. They are actually unlike white roof. They absorb a lot of radiation, solar radiation. But instead of converting solar radiation to heat, they convert solar radiation to electricity, right? So effectively cool the interior temperature, and also if a lot of buildings are using solar panels, they also would cool the temperature in your neighborhood. And finally, green space. Green space, green infrastructure. This has been promoted a lot in many places as a way of cooling the city. A green space can cool air temperature, can reduce air temperature by evaporation of water. But at the same time, evaporation also humidifies the air. So you, on one hand, lower temperature would bring relief to heat stress. But on the other hand, additional humidity would actually create stronger heat stress. So, the two tend to compensate each other. So we did a little study, global study, look at how the compensation occurs in urban green spaces. So we use this smart sensor, small sensor that has a Bluetooth module, so that will connect the your smartphone. So essentially turning your smartphone into a data logging device, and also converting that to geolocation device. And this picture shows you a performance test of multiple smart T sensors against some standard research grade sensors. And this is what it looks like on a bicycle. So this is part of a project called Biking for Science and Health. We did this work during the COVID lockdown. During the COVID lockdown, students had no access to indoor research facilities, but many of them were still interested in gaining research experience. So we recruited some volunteers, and we sent those smart sensors to them and asking them to bike in their home city and collect data in their home city. So we were able to do this for 15 cities, ranging from, say, our over a wide range of climate gradient from Hong Kong, China, to all the way to, say, Anchorage, Alaska. So in each biking route, each biking route would traverse build up at least one built up neighborhood and one green space. This is an example for West Rock Park in New Haven. And it turns out when you do this kind of measurement, you can then also separate the green space effect on humid heat on wet bulb temperature into an air temperature component and a humidity component. And it's a linear addition of those two components. And this is the results. And so we measured something like 150 green spaces in those cities, and we grouped those spaces into two groups, one with tall vegetation, meaning trees, another with short vegetation, grass. And both groups reduced air temperature in the daytime, but they also humidify air, creating higher humidity in the daytime. And the two offset each other. And so the net result, the effect on wet bulb temperature or humid heat is insignificant. At nighttime, though, then you end up with actually stronger cooling, a reduction in air temperature, and slight reduction in humidity. So the two combined would create a significant reduction in statistically significant reduction in wet bulb temperature in humid heat. So in other words, the benefit of green vegetation is not actually reduction in air temperature during daytime. The benefit in daytime is more through shading. The net benefit is actually occurred at nighttime reduction due to reduction in wet bulb temperature. And this is my final diagram showing you, if you want to analyze this sort of in a more thermodynamic angle, you look at the relationship between humidity change due to the green space effect and air temperature change. And this is the full compensation line. This dashed line is full compensation line. We always refer to this as adiabatic line. So if data points fall on this line, it means there's no net change in humid heat. And it turns out, the majority of the data points actually do follow this more or less this full compensation line. That's the reason why you don't see a significant change in wet bulb temperature. But at nighttime, though, the data sort of deviates from that full compensation line. It actually most of the data points fall below that compensation line, indicating net reduction in wet bulb temperature. So that's actually what I wanted to cover, and maybe I think I'm good with time. Perhaps I will stop here and then maybe engage in some dialogue with folks in this Zoom call. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Lee. We would like to go ahead and start with some questions, and we want to bring on some people from our MEER community first to ask you questions. And to the audience, I just want to remind you that you can send questions to Rue, co-host in the chat. So first, I'm delighted to invite MEER's founder and executive director, Dr. Ye Tao, to ask the first question. As you all probably know, Dr. Tao has a multidisciplinary background in physics, chemistry, engineering, and material science. Before founding MEER, Dr. Tao was running a lab at Harvard's Roland Institute to develop new microscopes to improve how we work with nanoparticles. However, after realizing how soon Earth would experience devastating effects, he refocused his time on the urgent problem of global warming. Thanks, Dr. Tao.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, Professor Lee, for a very clear explanation of wet bulb temperature and also the different contributing elements. So my first question is about your smart solar sensor. Have you guys tested their solar sensitivity? And I'm just wondering because you mentioned the shading being a potential a factor. So presumably maybe the shorter vegetation would offer less shade. So if the sensors were sensitive to sun, maybe that could be the reason behind the slightly higher air temperature.
So yeah, we actually put a lot of effort into that point. Try to the beauty of having mobile sensor rather than stationary sensor is that so I if I don't have a sensor here, so the sensor has shelter, but has allow air to go through. And we position the sensing element right in the part where air can go through the shelter. So we put the shield, we put that on biking. So when bikes start moving, you promote active ventilation. And that active ventilation turns out to be very, very important. And we did a test with another sensor with thermocouple, which has basically no radiation effect. And we bike in all exposed environment, you see a slight warming by 0.05 degrees, so 0.05 degrees of radiation effect, solar effect. So we think the reason that we have those kind of measurements we is real. The difference between two groups of vegetation is real. But if you look at the literature, if you go through look at the literature, you find that many people report stronger effect, cooling effect in urban parks, in tree parks than exposed grass. That's because they are using stationary sensors that don't have active ventilation. So you end up with sensors over grass, patch of grass, lawn, for example, exposed to sunlight, then you tend to underestimate the cooling of the grass green space. So I would urge actually caution when you read literature, when they use stationary sensors. That's a big issue. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes. So I think it's very good use of the time during COVID. And incidentally, like a lot of our initial work at MEER was also started during the COVID period, where we recruited many students
Mm.
from across the country who couldn't do their usual internships. So I have just two very short, like conceptual maybe questions you can help the audience understand better. One is in your initial map, you showed some negative urban heat islands clustering in the tropics in some cities. Can you explain the mechanism behind that? And the second is, what's your conjecture of the mechanism of nighttime humidity amplification in the center of the city?
So yeah, so uh, we do that's the map showing urban heat island is a map showing based on a modeling a climate model. So in some places, you do see a slight reduction in air temperature than the environment. And I haven't analyze those cities carefully, but they do have mechanisms where air temperature, a temperature in the city could be warmer, could be lower than the surrounding. One possible effect is aerodynamics. So those cities may be smoother compared to the surrounding. No, no, rougher, I should say rougher. I got this mixed up. It could be rougher, so the heat can dissipate more easily to the upper atmosphere, then your background might be shrub, low vegetation, and so some heat dissipation is very inefficient. So relatively speaking, in urban environment, actually the heat dissipation more efficient, dissipation by turbulence is more efficient. So you ended up with a slightly lower temperature. So that's possible, totally possible, right? But the majority of the cities, even 80%, 90% of cities would have the standard urban heat island.
Mhm.
We'll see a small fraction of cities do have slight cooled urban landscape. So that's the
Yeah.
answer to the first question. The second, can you remind me the second question?
The second was about what's causing the higher humidity at
Oh,
night
yeah,
in
yeah.
a city center.
Yeah, so it turns out depends on um, where your city is. If your city is in what we call energy limited region, like in New Haven is more like energy limited, so water availability is not an issue. During our observation, we have precipitation occurring, every few days. So water is not a big issue. So in energy limited cities, the evaporation is constrained by energy, not by water. So in city core, you have higher amount of stored heat, promoting
Mm,
both heating of the air, but also
mhm.
evaporation of water. So
Okay,
you end up with that correlation there.
I
So
see.
that's what we observed in city of New Haven. In other places, we also see that pattern as well. In many other cities in global south, we see that pattern.
Mm. I
Yeah.
wonder if metabolic water could be part to blame, especially in very
Human,
densely populated
human water. You mean?
respiration. Yeah,
Yeah, I know that I haven't looked into that carefully. I know metabolic heat is a contribution, is a
yes,
contributor
yes.
to urban heat,
Heat island. Yeah,
especially in congested area and highly populated area. And
yeah.
I haven't seen people quantifying sort of respiration vapor. That's an interesting
Hmm.
question. Yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
yeah. We're thinking about potentially trying to measure that our next measurement campaign. And
Mm.
regarding CO2 and heat, I think we estimate about, and also literature, like 10 to 50% of the urban heat in cities could be attributed to metabolic heat.
Mm.
So that's
Well,
yet
now
another source.
the other more important, actually, maybe more important source of humidity is actually um, uh, uh, vapor water produced by combustion, like
Hmm. Hmm.
cars, vehicles.
Yeah, yeah,
Combustion
yeah,
produces carbon dioxide. That's well known. Combustion also
yeah.
produces water. So
Hmm.
people have seen that accumulation of water in dry night. On dry night, when air is stagnant, you see build up
Mm.
humidity due to pipe exhaust from vehicles.
Yeah, so that's another reason potentially to worry about hydrogen-powered cars.
Yeah, yeah, we are a bit of that coming out of, yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I will leave the floor to the other members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tao. I next would like to welcome another MEER volunteer, Dr. Greg Chapp. He also has a very multidisciplinary science background, having earned a doctorate in chemical and materials physics. Today, he works as a researcher studying the physics and chemistry of individual atoms and molecules on surfaces, particularly their magnetic properties, with the long-term goal of learning to build devices at the atomic scale. Dr. Chapp.
Hello, thank you, Professor Lee. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So I had a couple questions. One was that it seems like in the urban heat island context, the vegetation has several effects. And I was also looking at your publication on this topic that talked about even differences between whether the vegetation is like tall or short plants and the relative differences of these. I'm curious to know, has there been any attention paid to whether there are other types of variations in vegetation that could influence these type of like urban heat island effects, such as, for example, certain plants have a drought adaptations such as crassulation acid metabolism mechanism. That means that they don't transpirate during the day and they only transpirate during the night. Like a lot of succulents do this, like jade plants.
Mm,
And this would potentially, if you had like large plantings of these would potentially reduce the amount of wet bulb globe temperature increase that would happen during the day from the humidity increase, and maybe redirect it toward the night. Another type of adaptation that's commonly seen is like woolly furs on plants that will make them appear very bright white. So basically, some plants may actually have relatively high albedo. So I was curious to know if you had seen anyone paying attention to these kind of differences in plants.
Not really. And so that's a question that people raise, the reviewers raise when we submit that paper for publication. They say, well, you guys group everything together. You have not looked at species difference. And so it turns out to study species effect is very, very hard. You can't find in a real, so we do this in what we call natural experiment, right? We don't actually go deliberately plant plants. We just go observe whatever is available in that city. And so in many of the parks, actually, you probably are aware in the United States, it's multi-species. You have all kinds of trees. So separating out the species effect is very hard. But you raised a very interesting question about cactus, though. Like those canned plants. They may be the way to go. I don't know, but I haven't seen a park full of cactus. Green space full of cactus. And then the idea of having furry plants with high albedo, that's also an interesting strategy. So we feel like if the real benefit, um, effective way of reducing wet bulb temperature, reducing humid heat is actually through reflection, by reflecting sunlight that way, not through evaporation, because through evaporation you're just trading humidity with temperature. So you're not. But if you have some plants that have high albedo, then you do have that net reduction effect, because it's basically removing the source of what we call the source of moist static energy. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Just a couple more questions. So another question is that some of the smart sensors that you employed in your study were mounted, as you mentioned, to cars and some mounted to bicycles. Would there be any potential advantage to mounting these to like drones?
Yeah, the sensor is not it's not designed for use of drones, and so it's if you the housing is a bit heavy. So if we want to have a operation on drone, we might want to reduce the weight of the housing, so that you don't put too much of burden on the drone. Drone payload is very limited, as you know. And having actually operating on a drone is easier because you're flying, so you have good ventilation, and so the radiation effect that Dr. Yao talked about is not as important.
Yeah, and then so on that topic, the movement of the sensors, then that helps a lot with the ventilation and reduces the radiation effect. But are there any plans to try to like say change the coding on the smart sensors to further reduce their radiation sensitivity?
That's unfortunately we don't have the the capacity to continue that. So we just we had the concept, right? And we wanted something on a shelter. We want a sensor that's very sensitive, low inertia. We want to have it to have a ability to communicate. So Bluetooth. We wanted to have very low power, so this button battery operation. So we put those concepts together. Then an engineering firm basically design it and produce those housing by 3D printing, basically, right? With 3D printing, your material choice is very, very limited. But I agree with you, having maybe a better, high, more reflective material would actually further improve the result. Maybe you can work on that together. I don't know.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
One last question. What do you think are the most important next step measurements or experiments along these lines of the study that you were discussing today?
Okay, so we have a few things that are going on right now, right? Just off the top of my head, I think we very much debatable is the question whether the results we have established for mid-latitude cities are applicable to cities in the global south, something that your group is also very much interested in. So the next step is to see whether a lot of the function, the relationships do hold in cities in the global south. We have a project that surveys a lot of cities in the global south. So hopefully, the results will come together soon. So that's one direction I think off the top of my head.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I'll
Greg.
open it to the rest of the community.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Chap. Next, we have another long-term volunteer with MEER, and he's been working with Dr. Tao for several years. Eric Schreiner is a first-year PhD candidate at Stanford University in the Civil and Environmental Engineering program. He's working to better understand the nuances of adding ground-based reflectors to various surfaces. Thanks, Eric.
Hello.
Hey.
One question I had was that you emphasized that the benefit from the decrease in temperature from green spaces during the day may not be as strong as people assume due to the corresponding increase in humidity.
Mhm.
Have you come across like proposals that address this problem and kind of decouple this temperature from the humidity? Or like,
When you say decouple, you mean try to reduce temperature, but at the same time, you do not increase humidity?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think the uh, planting trees is not the way to do it, right? Planting
Mhm.
trees, you get two. You cannot avoid to in order to reduce temperature, you have to evaporate water. By evaporating water, you increase humidity. So you cannot get around with that compensating relationship. But then reflective materials that you guys are very interested in. Reflective materials will do exactly that, what you just described. You can reduce temperature, but you won't humidify air. So the white roof, reflective pavements, and that's the way to go actually in order to bring relief in the daytime. So that's the I would think that would be the most appropriate approach to decouple the two.
I see. Okay. And then I was also wondering that in your couple of your graphs, you uh, first described how a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius was had to be sustained or kept under in order
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
compensable temperature loss from the human body to not overheat.
Mhm.
And then you showed one of your graphs where there were these deaths and heat waves without hitting that point. I was wondering if you have thought at all about changing that metric or changing the metric that you use to measure heat,
Mhm.
compensable heat in the human body.
Yeah, so that's a very active area of work, right? So 35 degrees is the theoretical physiological limit. Human adaptation can never overcome that limit. So
Mhm.
no matter what you do, you can change your way, the tissue, the fat amount, whatever, or how you, but there's no way we can overcome that upper limit. So we hit that limit without any possibility of overcoming it. But then that's just the upper limit, though. The actual threshold that you're talking about depends on many factors, right? Depending on the underlying conditions of a person. A healthy young person can withstand uh, wet bulb temperature almost close to that limit without suffering. But then a lot of people with underlying conditions, they would die even before temperature reached 27 degrees wet bulb temperature. So the 27 degrees number that people often use instead of 35. 35 is the deadly threshold. 37 degrees dangerous threshold. Not everybody will die, but people who are vulnerable, older people, people with underlying conditions, they may die. So that's based on epidemiological studies, right? Looking at death, mortality, looking at time and mortality occurred at the condition during which mortality occurred, they came up with a 27 degree as a rough guide. So that 27 degrees is much lower than 35. And then there are many other confounding factors, your diet, your acclimate you where you live. If you live in a colder environment, you tend to be more vulnerable to heat than if you live in a hotter environment because your body have adapted, right? Your body has adapted to the more hotter conditions. So those are all variations that can create some complication in this kind of assessment.
I see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And next up, I would like to introduce one of MEER's project officers, Ariana Ayupe. She graduated from Columbia University with a master's degree in climate and society, where she studied environmental and climate science and how climate change impacts communities. So Ariana, welcome.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. My question is have you observed any benefits with combining green space and with other passive cooling strategies like reflective roofs to enhance the urban climate resilience? And also, what designs or design principles would you recommend for a city planner if they're trying to aim to reduce both temperature and humidity stress?
So a lot of time you see activities centered on reducing temperature, right? Humidity is not quite on the agenda yet. So a lot of the strategies, aim to reduce temperature, and the humidity is just more of a recent sort of thing. Um, and so you do see cities actively, and we actually did a study a while ago looking at the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago is a pioneer in that sense. They got hit by a very deadly heat wave in 1995. You're probably aware of that event, and that was more like a watershed moment. And so the city decided two strategies, cooling strategies. One, green strategy, planting a lot of trees, right? So you see suddenly after 1995, the number of trees increased in the city. Also, phasing out dark roofs with more reflective roof materials. They wrote a zoning code, changed the zoning code, and we did a satellite study looking at the change in albedo. Turns out, after 1995, in a 10-year period after 1995, you could actually see citywide increase in citywide albedo. So both provide cooling in terms of temperature, but I would think albedo is more effective in reducing humid heat because it reduces temperature, but not humidifying air. But street trees would do both. And I'm not aware of a study that look at the confounding effect, the compensating sort of effects of street tree planting in Chicago. And in many places, you see a reflective strategy being implemented, right? And a counter argument, you're probably also aware, a counter argument against reflective strategies that they're saying, well, it could reflect sunlight away, but also could redirect sunlight to pedestrians, especially if you have walls, reflective walls, and then multiple reflection create more heat load on people working outside, pedestrians walking on the street. And so that's a sort of a counter argument against using the reflective strategy. Now, theoretically, you can use what they call retroreflective material. So that's also come into people's attention. You can have retroreflective material where sunlight hits the structure and then bounce back in the direction of the sun instead of redirecting to the pedestrian, right? So but that's totally still theoretical. I haven't seen any city implementing that strategy yet. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ariana. Okay, we will open it up to our audience. If you haven't yet and you have a question, write your question to co-host Rue in the chat. So we have a question from Jonathan. Were all the data gathering periods done in the height of summer? And if they were gathered in other seasons, do you expect any difference in results, or did you see any difference in results?
Okay, so that's a great question, right? So yeah, we collected data. The data we collected in New Haven using that car strategy was all year round. We did have data separating warm season and cold season. Patterns were more or less similar. And in that study of green space effects across multiple cities, yes, the experiment was done in the summertime to, the warm season when heat stress is relevant. In wintertime, we don't do that. And yeah, that's a good question.
And to piggyback on that, he said, like, for instance, the storing of sunlight heat from a winter daytime in the materials of the downtown city may provide a useful warming at night for the residents, or the data in winter may show that the downtown mass actually resists heating in daylight and makes the residents feel colder overall. What are your guesses on this winter cold island possibility?
Okay, not sure about the winter cold island, but I do appreciate the point about having benefit of warmer city in the wintertime, right? And so that's also another issue being debated about using reflective materials to cool cities. Because if you do that in some cities, in northern cities, you actually have what we call the energy penalty, wintertime energy penalty, because you cool by using reflective roofs, you cool the city temperature, and in response, you need more heating to bring in the temperature to a comfortable level. So that's called what we call the energy penalty. So now people have now come up with strategy where you have albedo that changes with temperature. High albedo in high temperature, low albedo in low temperature to minimize that cooling penalty, the heating penalty in the wintertime. And the other thing to keep in mind also, in the wintertime, especially in high latitudes where like some part of season in New Haven, where the roof is covered by snow. In that situation, no material works, right? Reflective or non-reflective doesn't matter because all you get is snow reflection. So your adaptive cooling or whatever, it doesn't work in those situations.
Thank you. We have a question from Lowell. Should building facades be free from shade, such as vines on building walls? Could creating a convection airflow between vines and a masonry wall, especially in areas without window openings or on older apartment buildings, help mitigate the urban heat island effect caused by the thermal mass of solid building facade materials?
Yeah, I'm just thinking here. Having vines, I think, would help because then you are not. So the nice thing about vines is that it's like a porous media, right? So they absorb sunlight, obviously, but then immediately the energy absorbed get dissipated by air motion, by turbulence. Unlike concrete block, where sunlight hits the block, and concrete block, especially smooth surface, has very low ability to dissipate heat by turbulence. And so what the thermal roughness is incredibly small. So you end up as energy been stored in the block. So you have immediate benefit there by not storing heat in the building, in the block, in the wall, and therefore you don't have like high temperature at nighttime. So that's the immediate cooling. And then you also have this cooling if the vines are uh, plants are well watered, they may actually create a bit of cooling, convective situation that was described earlier. You end up having temperature differential, and then the wall may be warm, but the facade may be warm, but the your green vegetation may be cold. You create that temperature differential to create micro convection going between the building wall and the surrounding. That could also have a benefit.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, we have a question about from Eduardo regarding the difference between white roofs and plain aluminum shingles. And he's wondering, are he's suggesting, are aluminum shingle roofs better for urban homes in the global north? And what are your thoughts on that versus white versus aluminum shingles?
Well, I'll be very cautious with aluminum shingle. First of all, it's very smooth. And if you study aerodynamics, you know that a smooth surface is not very good at dissipating heat by turbulent motion. The rock surface roughness so small, whatever heat get absorbed, it has very difficulty dissipating by turbulence. So that's one concern I have. And then another concern I have is, which is more relevant actually, is aluminum shingle has very low emissivity, very low emissivity, and low emissivity as low as 0.05, and some good aluminum material. So what you end up is that you end up totally cutting off the long wave radiation dissipation. So there's no so the aluminum shingle will not radiate energy in the form of long wave radiation. So you end up with actually extremely hot interior using aluminum shingles. And even though aluminum shingle may look reflective, it may reflect a little bit of sunlight, but then I think the reduction in emissivity outweighs the increase in albedo. So it's not a good construction material. In fact, a lot of the Globe South cities, a lot of the sort of slum neighborhoods use metal sheet blocks as roof material. That's a bad choice. They don't have a choice, right? Because that's a material that's readily available and easy to use, and that creates a heat trap because of reduction in emissivity.
Great. Thank you. I would like to ask one more question from Jonathan. The psychology of residents is that they tend to prefer being warm, even a bit over warm, over feeling cold. A permanent installation in a city that makes the area a bit colder during the cold season will run into this aversion to being cold as a greater irritation than to being over warm. Have you considered any installation that can change seasonally?
That's an interesting question. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how to appreciate that perspective. But so yeah, there are engineers now who come up with this temperature adaptive coding, right? So in colder weather, the material will turn darker, give you the impression be warmer. And in the warm season, high temperature, the reflection becomes brighter, and you feel colder. And in fact, it would also create colder temperature. So those materials are available. I don't know how durable they are, whether they can withstand dust, contamination over time, and whether that adaptive behavior would degrade over time due to weather. So that's still remain to be known. But people are thinking about, how do you handle both cold and warm, sort of compensating effects of warm and cold. That's a good question. Very good question.
Well, thank you. I think that we will go ahead and close with that today, Professor Lee. And we want to thank you so much for coming to MEERTALK and furthering our climate education, and especially the extremely important topic of heat islands in cities. And it's a big fear for many around the world. So we very much appreciate your work and sharing today. At MEER, we are working to help educate the public while also developing technologies to help curb the warming on our planet. We invite you to keep learning about Earth's energy imbalance and climate science on our website. We're primarily a volunteer staff, so please consider making a monthly donation of any amount if you've enjoyed being here or watching our MEER Talks on our YouTube channel. Also, please check us out on social media. If you've found being here beneficial today, please tell someone about MEERTALK. And we have a slight change for next month. We hope to see you all again sooner than July. On Monday, June 23rd, we will celebrate MEER's 5th anniversary, and we will also be participating in London Climate Action Week. It will be a hybrid virtual and in-person event. The in-person event will be held at London's Foundling Museum. Dr. Tao Author and planetarian Herb Simmons and renowned economist Professor Steve Keen will be speaking at that event. Thank you so much for coming today and enjoy your week.